All right, welcome back, folks. Today we have Scott Saunders with us. He's an amazing man doing amazing things in the real estate space, but also in the 1031 space. And if you haven't heard about 1031s, Scott is going to give us a great education today. So, Scott, welcome.
Hey, Tony, great to be with you. Always great to talk about 1031 exchanges and how the average investor can build wealth by deferring their gain, leveraging it up to larger and larger assets. It's an exciting topic. You probably know that well because you've scaled and grown yourself. So it's great to be with you.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun conversation for the viewers. I met Scott probably about a year ago at a conference, and I was just blown away by Scott's knowledge. Again, both on real estate and also on 1031s. He's been involved on both sides of those. So for the viewers, right? For those that don't know what a 1031 exchange is, help us start there.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So starting off, when you hear the word 1031, you're like, why do they call this thing a 1031 exchange? And really, it's pretty simple. There is a section in the tax code called Section 1031, and that says this is what an investor can do. And Tony, believe it or not, it's been in the tax code for 102 years. So we're not talking about something that was just concocted or started being used for literally over a century. Business owners and investors have been using this. So let me give you the most simple, basic description. If I sell a property held for investment in a taxable sale, I get rid of it, and then people give me cash. That would be a taxable sale. In a 1031, I take a property held for investment or used in a business, I give it up, and then I receive back what we call a like-kind property, also held for investment. So a taxable sale, you give up property, you get cash. In an exchange, I give up property held for investment, I get back other property held for investment. At the most simple level, that's what it is. Now, there are some time deadlines and there's some processes, but it's really just giving up a property that you've held for investment and then purchasing what we call another like-kind property that will also be held for investment. The theory, Tony, is if I haven't cashed out and liquidated, I'm still holding property for investment. So why should I be taxed on any gain? Because at the end of the day, I've just moved my investment dollars from one property to another, but I haven't put them in my pocket. I haven't cashed out. So that's kind of the rationale why this is able to take place.
For the viewers out there, it's not like we, neither Scott nor I, expect you to go out and read tax code 1031. There are people out there to help. Scott is out there to help, and we'll be sharing his contact information. But there's also, in the world of 1031s, there's also a what's referred to as a QI, a qualified intermediary. Can you help the viewers understand what a QI is and what role they play to help the buyer and the seller?
Yeah, happy to do that. In the old days, Tony, we used to do a swap. So if you had a farm and I had a farm with another crop, you and I would get together, we would just swap our farms. And that's great, but for most people, it's really hard to just swap assets, right? We might be in different locations, we might have different values, we might have different criteria. So this thing in the code came about. It's a result of a 1979 court case. And Tony, as you said, you don't need to study tax code. Hopefully by this, going through this, we're going to give people the basics so they understand the mechanisms. But here's what happens. When you want to do an exchange today, we do what's called a delayed exchange, or sometimes it's referred to as a deferred exchange. Here's kind of the sequence of steps. You as an investor, you list your property for sale like you ordinarily would. You get it under contract with a buyer. Now, prior to closing, you engage what is called a qualified intermediary. And for those in different parts of the country, sometimes you'll hear them called a QI, sometimes an intermediary, sometimes a facilitator, sometimes an accommodator. But that's a middleman. It's a company that's actually going to hold the funds and prepare the documents. So the qualified intermediary, through an assignment of the purchase and sale agreement, steps into the shoes and actually sells the property to the buyer. The qualified intermediary receives the funds. So that's what we call the first part of an exchange. Then the investor has some time deadlines, and I'll walk you through the basics. They close on day 0. That's their closing date on the property being sold. They have 45 calendar days to identify property they want to buy. And we can talk about what that means in a moment. They then have another 135 days after that for a maximum of 180 to close on the property that they've identified. So in much the same mechanism, they make an offer on property, they counter, they get it under contract with the seller, then that purchase agreement is assigned to the qualified intermediary. The qualified intermediary now steps into the shoes as the buyer, takes the money they're holding, they purchase that property and have it deeded back to the investor. So the investor is merely giving up a deed to property they're getting out of. They're receiving back a deed to property that's being acquired. That qualified intermediary sells the relinquished property. The qualified intermediary takes the money they're holding from the sale, purchases replacement property. So it really, if you were to think of it in simplistic terms, it's a sale with a qualified intermediary followed by a later purchase, also with that middle person called a qualified intermediary. So
Yeah,
does that make sense?
it does. My goal here is to take the mystery out of it for the viewer, because sometimes these, we talk about 1031s. It sounds like this kind of mysterious thing. How do I do it? And do I have to study on how to do it? And what if I get it wrong? And if you do get it wrong, you try to do it on your own, and you do get it wrong, there are penalties or disqualifications. And so you could disqualify yourself from the benefits of a 1031. So we need to make sure we're doing it right. But it's not a mystery. There's a very well defined process. There's great people out there to help you walk through a 1031, make sure you're hitting all the deadlines, make sure you're hitting all those thresholds. So I don't want the viewer to feel like they got to go it alone. There's people out there
Yeah.
to help.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll just share, there's an industry trade organization. Now it's kind of a mouthful, but I'm going to give you a really easy website to remember. So the trade organization of qualified intermediaries is called the Federation of Exchange Accommodators. I'm a former board member and president of that group, but their website is super easy to remember. It's 1031.org.
No,
So most reputable qualified intermediaries belong to that group. And you can learn about the process there. You can learn about qualified intermediaries. Certainly the company that I'm with, Asset Preservation, we're one of the larger ones. We're a resource. So as an investor, I wouldn't let the fact that you haven't done one of these before prevent you from doing it. It's a pretty straightforward process. I've got a one-page checklist that maybe I can share with you afterwards. You can post in the show notes, but I've got a one-page cheat sheet that walks you through all the steps on just one piece of paper. So all you got to do is just see where you're at in the process. And the other thing to share, Tony, many good qualified intermediaries try and make this very user friendly for people that have never done it. So when you close on your sale, typically the qualified intermediary is going to send you immediately communication, letting you know, here's your 45 days, here's your 180, here's a form to identify properties on, here's a summary of the rules. So at the end of the day, as an investor, you have to do the exchange properly, as you noted. But a good qualified intermediary is going to kind of walk you through the process, let you know what the next steps are in terms of making it a little bit easier. So many people we work with, I'd say well over half of the people every month are people that have never done an exchange before. They're first time investors. And, we haven't talked about why, but the reason why is you have a lot of gain on a property. Think of it, Tony, anybody that's owned real estate the last few years or the last decade, whether it's commercial or residential, farmland, a vacation home, all around the country, property values have gone up a lot. So everybody that's owned real estate or sat on it has tremendous what we call gain in the real estate. And their choices when they sell it are either write a big check to Uncle Sam, which would be a pretty hefty tax bill,
yeah.
or redeploy all that into better performing properties. And, Tony, I'll tell you, and I'm sure you've seen this because you work with multifamily. Many people get started in real estate with a piece of dirt, a single family rental, a duplex.
Yeah.
They exchange that for 2 more single families and then for 4. And then they go into an 8-plex. And then before you know it, they've got a 30-unit apartment building. I just read recently, of all people, Arnold Schwarzenegger owns a ton of real estate. He bought a 6-plex and exchanged that into larger multifamily. He has something like $300 million in real estate today
Wow.
that all started with that first 6-plex. And he just continued to do 1031 after 1031. And now he's got hundreds of millions. Now, I wouldn't mind having hundreds of millions, but for the average investor to maybe go from a small property and get up to a million and then multi-million,
Yeah.
that's enough to provide financial security for your average investor. And that's what a 1031 allows you to do, is that instead of paying off the top to the government, you
Mhm.
take all your money and you redeploy it into a little larger property, maybe more units, maybe
Yeah.
more properties. And then you do that a few times, and that real estate investor that exchanges, they've got this massive portfolio. The one that's paying the taxes, they might move up, but they're paying the government, the federal government, state government at every move. So they have a lot less money to work with to redeploy.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Thank you, Scott, for explaining all that. Yeah, sometimes folks think a 1031 exchange is only for, the wealthy or the big investors in the room. It's really not. Folks can do it with a single family home or these smaller investment properties. The major benefit is not paying income tax, federal income tax on those gains on the property that you're relinquishing, right?
Right.
So that's a huge benefit. But also we can't dismiss the benefit of the new property that is being picked up. And I'll share my personal story. I know you've done 1031 exchanges, so you personally know them well. I've done so far in my life just done one, but I'm looking at
Okay.
doing a second one right now. And so my first one, just to share my story, I sold a what we call a triplex. 3 units, 3 apartments. Again, not a big building, just 3 apartments. Very doable for the average Joe out there, average Joe, average Jane. And so I decided to sell that triplex because there was no more upside opportunity in that property. At the time, I was cash flowing maybe $1,000 a month of cash flow, which was great, good money, but there was no way that was really going to get pushed higher. There was no value add that I could do. I couldn't add more units. It was pretty much tapped out. So I said, well, let me go ahead and find another property that I can invest in to increase my cash flow that has some value add opportunity. Oh, by the way, when I sell, I'm also gonna have this tax deferment, right? I won't be paying taxes on this profit that I'm making by selling this triplex. So there was this added benefit of which I did end up buying a 5 unit property, right? I did this 1031 exchange. I sold that triplex. I bought a 5 unit building where the market rents, the rents were under market at the time. The units needed some work, but it's a beautiful property in a beautiful location with a lot of upside, sitting on an acre and a half of land that could be further developed. So there was a lot of benefits there, not just the tax benefits of a 1031 exchange, but also now getting into a property that I'll tell you today, I probably cash flow 6 to 7 thousand a month on that property.
Wow.
Cash
All right.
flow,
So
right?
let's just recap that. That's a pretty powerful story, Tony. You went from 1,000, so you had $350 per unit, roughly positive. Decent investment, but you realized there really wasn't much more to go with it, right? You bought it, it was performing. You went from that 1,000 positive cash flow to 6 or 7,000 in 1031,
Yep.
just by going from 3 units to a better 5 unit building. And if I hear you correctly, that's got some extra dirt. So potentially you've got development potential down the road. You could add units. You've got things you can do. Your cash flow, whatever that is, 6 times, 6 or 7x cash flow through one 1031 exchange. I
Yeah.
mean, Tony, that's powerful, right? That's a huge
Yeah.
impact on your finances with one 1031. That's a
Yeah,
great
so
story.
thank you for, allowing me to share that and being able to, I want the viewers to understand it's not just the tax benefits. The tax benefits, huge benefit, obviously, but it's also being able to get into a property with some opportunity or maybe some upside potential, some value add, or maybe even a different asset class. But before we go into maybe some different asset classes, because I do want to talk a little bit about the like kind exchange piece of this. I know you've done some 1031 exchanges. Do you want to share any stories there?
Yeah, I've done a few during the years. One that I did a couple of years ago was an asset I bought in Arizona, outside of Phoenix. It happened to be a model home, so I had a relationship with a model home builder and owned a few of those that were leased back. But this one, Tony, I kind of went through. I've had this one pre-crash. I
Mm,
bought it shortly before the market tanked,
mm,
held on to it. It came back and then went above its value, but I didn't really feel like riding that roller coaster again in Phoenix, right? So it had gone up and appreciated well beyond what I paid for it. I exchanged out of one asset. I picked up 4 replacement properties, single family in St. Louis, Missouri, and 1 in Memphis, Tennessee. So I went out of one asset into 5 in one move.
yeah.
I've got a lot more cash flow with those assets. I've got better appreciation because now instead of having one building to go up, I've got 5. And for me, I got a little simplification. I only had one asset in Arizona, and now I went into markets where I've got relationships with property managers. So adding assets with an existing property manager meant I was able to get rid of that LLC and that whole relationship. So it simplified my life as a real estate investor. So that's one I've done recently. Now I'm going to admit, Tony, your numbers crush mine. I can't claim to being 6 or 7x on cash flow. That's an amazing return. But as you shared that, I talked to someone a few weeks ago, did something similar, went out of a small property into a few more units, and they quadrupled their cash flow. It was amazing. So at the end of the day, it allows you to kind of move forward. And one thing I want to touch upon, just a quick comment. We get asked a lot, what's the capital gain tax rate? And it's a super simple question, but the answer is actually more nuanced. There isn't a capital gain tax rate. When you sell real estate, you've got 4 potential taxes to pay. Depreciation recapture is taxed at 25%. So it's higher than federal capital gain. And a lot of people go, oh, I didn't know that. I've owned it now for 20 years. You mean I have to pay taxes on all of that tax benefit? And I'm like, yeah, that's number one. Federal gain at 15 or 20 depends upon your taxable income. But remember, if you sell an asset, it might move you into a higher tax bracket. So you might be at the 15, it might push you into the 20% bracket. Then you got this pesky little thing called the net investment income tax. And without going into the mechanics and why it's there, it's an additional 3.8% tax on any net investment income over 200,000 for single people and over 250,000 for married filing jointly. So Tony, just a side note, there's a reason to say single. You actually get a better tax rate.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one that I think is important to add is you've got state taxes. So if you're in Texas or Tennessee or Florida, not a big deal. In California, the state tax rate, the maximum is 13.3%. So the point would be when I add all 4 taxes together, I'm looking at something like 30, 40, 45% of all of my profit, my gain being owed to the government in taxes. And so I find a lot of people when they talk to their CPA before they sell, they're facing a much larger tax bill than they really thought in their head. A lot of people think, oh, it's just the 15 or 20% federal capital gain. And they don't know about those other components that add to the tax and make it a lot bigger. So one practical tip to everybody, before you sell any property, call up your CPA, find out, hey, what is my tax hit going to be? And 9 times out of 10, the good and bad news is, the bad news is you're going to have a bigger tax bill. Maybe you have a little more gain or profit than you thought too. So that's the good news. But do that before you close because you can't set up an exchange after you sold the property. It's got to be done before closing. There's no way to unwind it and set it up after the fact.
Yeah, and you hit on something that I've thought of, and I want to kind of dive into a little bit here is that depreciation piece. If you've owned a property for a number of years, you're probably close to the end of that depreciation schedule and not going to be able to take that tax deduction of depreciation for much longer. And so transferring into a new property, maybe a bigger property, right? Being able to capitalize on that equity you have on the property. Like me, I transferred from a 3 unit to a 5 unit, bigger property, and I was able to capture more depreciation to offset my income, right? So that's another reason for doing the 1031.
Yeah, absolutely. And another twist, I'll do just a brief segue. Some of your people watching this may do what's called a cost segregation study, called a cost seg. It's a very popular strategy. And what you're doing is you're just reclassifying some components of real estate and you're giving them shorter depreciable lives. And without getting into all the mechanics of that, the net result is if you do a cost seg study, you get a lot of depreciation right now and less in the future. So with the time value of money, you get a huge benefit. But the flip side is if you get all that depreciation now, you're going to have more depreciation that's taxed at that higher rate. So those that do cost seg studies, which I think are a phenomenal strategy, are going to face more depreciation. So if you do a cost seg study, you almost have to do a 1031 exchange or else face an even higher tax bill. So what's interesting, Tony? The tax code is to me just a treasure map, right? You got all these little provisions, and those of us in real estate that figure out how to use a few of these nuggets, like a 1031 exchange, like cost seg, and like some of these other tools, we're able to use the code and kind of have the wind at our backs. It helps us build wealth. It helps us move farther, faster, because instead of fighting the tax code, we're actually using some legitimate tools that have been put in the code to help stimulate the economy, and we use them for our benefit, and then we get all these wonderful tax benefits. So that's how I look at the tax code. I love it. The tax code is fascinating, and the older I get, the more I know I need to look at opportunities that were placed in there by Congress,
Yeah.
take advantage of those, and the more I do that, the more I benefit, and the more I align my investment dollars with what Congress wants me to invest in anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, we all know the world is changing very rapidly these days. Debt's going up and up, and we are seeing some scary things happen in this country as well as the world. We've experienced inflation at the highest rates in most of our lifetimes. So we're in an interesting place, and preserving our wealth is at least for me, and I know for you, Scott, is at the top of our list because we want to make sure we and our families are better positioned for today, tomorrow, next year. And the best way we can do that, as far as I know, is real estate and capitalizing on some of these laws that allow us to do this. We're not
Yeah.
cheating the government. We're not reducing our tax base because we're doing funny math on the side. This is all legit stuff. It all goes through our CPAs. I personally don't do my own taxes. They're too complicated. I send them to my CPA. As I share with folks, it took me 5 years to get through college. 5 years. So I'm not very smart. So I need to hire smart people like my CPA who knows the tax code, who's going to do everything by the book to allow me to pay, which for the past couple of years, I've paid $0 in federal income tax. And that's
Yeah.
through you had mentioned cost segregation studies. We've used that to pay zero federal tax. We've used 1031 exchanges to move money around and pay zero tax. So all this is possible. Again, I was just trading like a triplex, right? A
Yeah.
three-unit property. It can easily be done with a single family in a duplex and really build your wealth from there. It's
Abs-
doable.
a- Absolutely. And Tony, just a little segue. You mentioned about, providing for your family. So when we met, I met you, you shared with me a book. And so what's interesting about you, and some of your viewers might know this, others may not, but particularly people watching this on some of the channels I'll post this on, you wrote a book, seeing things like inflation and seeing some of the pressures going on economically, and you wrote a book, the title Freedom at Risk. And you wrote that to kind of share, hey, here's the problem and here's some solutions. So Tony, if you can, what's kind of the uptake? What would a reader learn from your book? What would they get out of it? And then maybe also, besides going to Amazon, how could they track down your book and get the information? Because you took a lot of time putting that together, a lot of data on all sorts of things. I've read the book. It's a great book. Tell us a little bit about the book and how they can track it down.
Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate you. So the book basically took about 4 years to research and compile, edit, and get published. So about 4 years. So there is a lot of data, a lot of research that went into that book. It's a pretty easy read. And the reason why I put it together is because I kept having these reoccurring conversations with folks, with family and friends about, how messed up things are today. And they would say, Tony, don't worry. After a Democrat leaves the White House, we'll have a Republican and everything will be okay. And I'm like, No, it's not just whether there's a D or an R in the White House. There's so many things that are working against our freedoms. So I broke the book down. Part one is an easy read. I broke it down into 5 chapters. We talk about how the education system steals our freedoms, how politics steals our freedoms. We talk about society itself, how society is stealing some of our freedoms. We talk about the economy, how the economy steals our freedoms. And we also talk about monetary policy through the Federal Reserve, how that steals our freedoms. So we break it down into those 5 chapters to help folks understand it's not just whether there's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House, because even if we fixed alone, that alone won't solve our problem in terms of our freedoms being stolen. So once they read part one of the book and they understand that more fully, part two of the book goes into the how to protect your personal and financial freedoms. And so we break it down with pretty much an a la carte package on both the personal freedoms and the financial freedoms. Personal freedoms, like, one example I give there is, if folks have some backyard space or a deck, start your own garden, right? Being able to have fresh fruit or vegetables from your own garden is a great way to have some personal freedoms. You know where that fruit is coming from or those vegetables are coming from. There's peace in your life when you're tending to that garden, so you're getting away from the mainstream media and from the politicians. You're uncluttering your mind, so you're freeing up your mind, creating more positive space in your mind to be able to make better decisions. There's a lot of goodness. We have a garden. We're going to be harvesting somewhere between 300 and 400 potatoes this fall, right? And that's just what we grow for potatoes. We have a bunch of other things that we're growing as well. We love it. So
That's a lot of tater tots right there.
it is. So, that's something that I personally practice in my personal life and have experienced the goodness out of it. Now, on the financial freedom side of it, there's a lot of different, again, a la carte ideas I give folks, everything from real estate to investing in asymmetric plays to dividend producing stocks, and just a bunch of different assets. But I don't expect folks to subscribe to every single idea I have in that book. My intent is to make them think after they read that chapter about personal freedoms. Make them think about how are they protecting their personal freedoms? What are they actively doing? The same thing with financial freedoms. What are they actively doing? And if they aren't doing anything, I encourage them to take action, right? We can't
Hmm.
allow, the government to be the single source to drag us towards one end or the other. We ourselves have to take actions to determine our own freedoms in this world. So
Yeah.
that's my goal.
Tony, one thing I liked about your book is that you do have I loved your illustration of a la carte, right? It's like a menu. It's not one size fits all. You and I like real estate. 90% of the millionaires in America and the world made their wealth in real estate. So that to me is part of a strategy. But what's nice in your book is you talk about other ways to gain a little bit of freedom personally and financially. So there's not like one path that you have to go down this one path. You can pick a number of things. And maybe if you combine a few strategies together, you might get a better outcome or you might do it faster. But the reader can basically look through it and go, oh, that really lines up with what I like. Maybe somebody, likes the dividend stocks and that's a preference. But there are a lot of ways to get from point A to point F, called point F freedom, right? There are a lot of ways to get there. And your book, I think, talks about different ways to do it. So what's nice is it's a little bit more on a macro level. It's not, you've got to do it this one particular way. And so I think it's great. So Tony, where do people get the book? I mean, we all know Amazon's out there, but you've got a website. I know you've got a channel where you educate people. How do people
Sure.
find your book and track you down?
So the best way people can track me down is by going to dirtybootscapital.com. And they can also send me an email, Tony Lopes at dirtybootscapital.com. That'll come directly to me. I respond to all my emails. I'm fanatic like that. But yeah, it was a great experience. Thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak about it. And it really opened up my mind to a lot of the macro type issues that are impacting us today. And it kind of led me down the path after researching all this, and hopefully for the readers, it expands their mind as well, and allowed me to have a more powerful conversation when I first met you, Scott. And we're continuing that conversation today on the oil and gas arena. And
Mhm.
so bringing it back to the 1031 exchange piece, I am now looking at doing a 1031 exchange, selling real estate, multifamily real estate, and possibly doing a 1031 exchange into oil and gas, which I see as a great investment for the future. So maybe you can help the viewers understand how that all happens, because a lot of times people think you sell a multifamily, you have to buy a multifamily. Maybe help
Right.
us bridge that gap there.
Yeah, let me give it 35,000 feet, and then I'll drill down to some different examples. So with a 1031 exchange, you have to exchange property either held for investment or used in your business. So it could be an investment property, single family, land, anything like that. It could be a property used in a business. So if you've got a car repair facility and you own the building, you can exchange out of that just like you could investment property. At the end of the day, you've got to exchange what we call real property or real estate for other like kind real estate held for investment or used in a business. But real estate's broad. And so, Tony, you addressed a common misconception, which some people think, well, dirt for dirt and improved property for improved. Any type of real estate qualifies. So I can go from bare land into a single family, into a triplex, into an apartment building, into an industrial building. All of those types of real estate are considered like kind. Now, where there are all these potential things, and I'll rattle through them kind of quickly. When we think of real estate, we tend to think of property, right? Okay, it's got to be real estate, tangible dirt with a building on it. But there are all sorts of property. You can look to state law, and there are things that qualify that you would never think of as real estate. So in Colorado, water rights are considered real property. So in certain arid states, a water right is real estate. In New York City, you can exchange air, literally what's called an air right or a transferable development right. If I can build a building and add 10 stories, even though I haven't added it to the building, that's considered real property. Easements qualify. So a conservation easement can qualify, an agricultural easement, a cell tower, and what's known as a perpetual communication easement qualifies. There are things called Delaware statutory trusts, fractional ownership. A vacation home held for investment under certain requirements qualifies. And then, Tony, you mentioned oil, gas, and minerals. So, certain programs that are considered a royalty interest, the right to extract out all the oil and gas or minerals, are considered like kind property, and there's guidance on that. So, you've got to do your homework. There are certain programs that qualify. A royalty payment for just a year or two won't work, but the right to extract it out of the earth, that's considered real property. So, real property is so broad. In another way, maybe to look at it, maybe kind of flip it around to simplify it. Let's talk about two types of property that don't qualify. So the first one is property held for sale. So that would be a developer putting up a brand new building to sell it. That doesn't qualify. Home builders that build a subdivision can't do that because those properties are being held for sale. If you're an investor and you do what's called a fix and flip, right? Buy an asset cheap, put some improvements onto it, and then sell it right away. If it's a fix and flip, not rent it out, that's excluded. So property held for sale is excluded. The other one would be the home you live in. If you live in your house, it's not held for investment. But Tony, we could go off on a tangent. You can have a home and you might Airbnb a room or two, or maybe you have a basement that's locked off that you rent out to that young couple or that college
Yep.
student. So a house could even be considered a rental in certain cases if you rent out a few rooms. So, a home office is used for business. So a lot of realtors have a home office, or maybe you take your garage and for your side business, that's a workshop. Well, that square footage is considered part of your business. So There are a lot of interesting planning opportunities, years of going in and saying, hey, I want to go to multifamily and maybe get into energy. You're looking ahead as to what the needs are for the country. But that shows you a 1031, it's so broad. So many things can be considered held for investment purposes. It's very, very broad.
And so this is why you and I work to help people get into real estate because that's your foot in the door. That's your foot in the door to create some cash flow. That's your foot in the door to reduce your taxable income. That's your foot in the door to create wealth. And now, as we're talking about, expand into other areas to protect yourself. So, Scott, I know you're doing a lot in that arena to help folks. Can you share a little bit about the coaching that you do with folks on the side to help them get into the real estate game?
Yeah, happy to do that. So professionally, I'm a qualified intermediary with asset preservation. And we spend a lot of time just helping people know the process, the rules, and what goes on. So we'll give the contact information at the end. Personally, I help people starting with single family homes, just basic Midwest homes, begin to build a portfolio and scale it. And the reason I do that is it's worked for me personally. And I want to see other people, kind of what you want to do, Tony, help them obtain economic freedom, which gives personal freedom. And so sometimes there's that misconception that to be a big real estate investor, you've got to invest in apartments and shopping centers and things that are, quite frankly, a little complex for the average person to understand. The financing's complicated, and you're competing against big dogs, right? You're competing against BlackRock and people, Grant Cardone, people that are very sophisticated and have teams. To buy a little home in the Midwest in Indiana or Kansas City or Memphis, you're looking at maybe 90 to $150,000 for a nice 3 bedroom, 2 bath brick home.
Yeah.
It'll kick off cash of maybe 300-400 bucks a unit starting off. Now those rents will go up. But a lot of people, to save for $1 million commercial property with a 35% down payment, you're talking 350
Yeah.
grand. A Midwest home for 100,000 that you can get a conventional loan on, you got to maybe save 20 to 25,000 to get your foot in the door. So I've got a program, just at my name, scottrsaunders.com, where I show people and coach them how to buy your first property and then how to buy your second and your fourth and how to build a portfolio. And essentially, if I were to simplify it, how to build a portfolio that looks like a REIT, a real estate investment trust, made up of single family assets. So it's a diversified portfolio of little homes, but aggregated together, it now performs like a commercial portfolio. So that's what I've done personally. And so I just share with people what I've done, how I've done it, and then I'll share with them my contacts, my lenders, the people I work with. And that's kind of a side passion project of mine.
Yeah.
Kind of like you with your book, wanting to see more people become personally and economically free. I see this as a simple path, and it gives the average American, someone with an average salary, a way to get their foot in the door, get an asset, and then maybe get a second asset and begin to slowly. And, it takes 5 or 10 years to build a portfolio, but 10 years down the road, that person who now owns 10, 15, 20 single family homes, they're in a much better position, right? Inflation is now their ally.
Yeah.
Inflation pushes up their asset value, their rents, it debases their debt. The tax code gives them write-offs. All these benefits happen. And I'm convinced that if somebody has 10 single family homes, it would dramatically change the trajectory of their finances. They could become self-sufficient in retirement. They have assets they can pass on to their children and grandchildren. Tony, you and I know this nation is moving to more of a renter nation.
Yeah.
What we grew up with is not going to be what people are going to have in the future. They're going to be a small group of owners and a big group of renters. And so I'd rather be in the group of owners that have the assets and, have good assets. By the way, mine are turnkey. So I provide a fully renovated house. So beautiful brick home with fresh paint, freshened up kitchens, bathrooms, beautiful floors, nice landscaping. These are nice middle class homes, what I call a B class home that I could live in any of my properties. So at the end of the day, I'm providing affordable housing, and myself and other investors, we have entire neighborhoods that have been transformed from a little dumpy and saggy to now desirable neighborhoods because we have so many of these houses that have been turned that now it's attracted a higher caliber of tenant. And so to me, that's fun, right? We're helping people out, we're turning around communities, we're growing the tax base, and we're providing clean, safe, affordable housing that frankly, like I said, I could live in any one of my houses if I ever wanted to and be perfectly happy.
Yeah, it's a win-win-win. It's a win for you personally because as an investment, it's positive for you. It's a win for the folks that you coach because it allows them to get into the space at a pretty low price point, makes it doable for your coaching clients. And then it's also a win for the tenants because it provides that affordable home that so many people desperately need, right?
Yep.
So it's all great stuff you're doing on that front. So for the viewers, make sure you look up Scott if you're needing any help there. Again, Scott said, what's the website they can go
The
to?
website is just my name, scottrsaunders.com. So,
Beautiful.
and again, it's just a side passion. I spend most of my time in the 1031 space, because and they kind of interrelate, right? You invest, you need 1031, right? So, and if you're doing 1031s, you want to buy more investment property and grow and scale. So they're two concepts that kind of mesh together really well.
And so if folks need help on the 1031 side, where can they find you, Scott?
Easy, there are a couple ways easily. Let me give an easy phone number to remember: 800-282-1031. So 800-282-1031. Asset Preservation's website is APIexchange.com. And then finally, my email, Tony, I'm just like you. I answer every single email. It's just my name, Scott at APIexchange.com. Reach out. We spend so much time talking to people that maybe aren't doing an exchange, but they have a few properties and want to know how they could plan out the next steps, or they've got questions. I'm in a partnership. What do I do? Or how do I plan in advance? So, don't think you have to be under contract with the property sell. Reach out. We've got all sorts of resources on the website. We probably have 150, 200 articles talking about various aspects of exchanging. There's a lot more than we covered in this short segment, Tony, about 1031s. Not that much more that makes it complicated. So I really liked your point. I mean, we covered a lot of the basics. So I think people watching this will know it's not that complicated. Most investors do this, and it's just a very straightforward process. But we could flush out a little bit more of the details on a personal phone call. So everybody's got a unique situation. And sometimes the best saying is, hey, these are my facts and circumstances. Tell me what I can do or what I can't do, because there's not a one size fits all when it comes to 1031. A commercial investor's got a very different situation than maybe somebody just starting out, and we can help anybody all along that spectrum, and happy to do that. Just doing what we're doing here. I do this on the
Yeah.
telephone all day long.
Yeah, this is great. I appreciate you coming on today, Scott. I truly do. I know the viewers are going to value this information, and I do hope they all go off and take some action around this. Like you said, if you're not even looking to do a 1031 exchange today, go to the website, go read some articles, understand how this may impact you in a positive way, so that when you get to that point, a year or two down the line, you have a better idea of what's available to you, and then you can have a more powerful conversation when you call Scott up to do that 1031 exchange. So it really helps position you. So, Scott, any closing comments?
You know what? 1031 exchange is a tool to build wealth. Bottom line, learn it, use it, and benefit. And I promise 10 years down the road, you'll look back and you'll see what a phenomenal tool it was to help you build and scale a portfolio. And that doesn't matter if you're a beginner, started with one single family and you want to end up with 4 or 6, or you've got a little 3-unit and you want to end up in a larger multifamily or whatever. You could be a farmer or rancher and you want to get out of your land into improved properties. So take advantage of it. It's a powerful tool. And Tony, I'll just say, and a pitch to you: if people haven't read your book, get your book. It's a simple paperback. You cover a lot of great information in there, and I appreciate it. That's how we met. I remember you handed me your book, and for people that don't know, not everybody hands out copies of their book, right? You have 4 years of research that went into what you handed me, and I got the benefit of all that. So I'm fortunate, and I really appreciate that. And that kind of started our relationship and friendship. So thanks so much.
Yeah, and thank you. I had such a powerful conversation with you that day that the book was such a small token I could give to you. to say thank you because you're a wealth of information. Again, the viewers seek Scott out. He is a wealth of information on a lot of different fronts. You won't be sorry there. Scott, I appreciate your time today. I truly do. And, maybe we'll come back in another 6 months, do an update on this and talk a little bit more about market dynamics and have some more fun.
Sounds great. Thanks, Tony.
Excellent. Thank you.